Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 157, and we're in a new book. We're in Nehemiah, and we're going to cover chapters 1 through 3 today. So remember, Nehemiah runs parallel to Ezra. And so just like we did with Kings and Chronicles, Ezra is more of a vertical book, and Nehemiah is more of a horizontal book. We get insight from the king and them building the wall and seeing the opposition with that. So let's hop in the text. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, listen to his prayer. It's beautiful. I won't read it all, but I do want to grab the end of this chapter before we walk into chapter 2. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you have given your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling. Here it is, for the name. That's what it's always about. I mean, I said I wasn't going to read all of this, but it's so good. I love reading biblical, godly men of God prayers, but because this should help shape our prayers, inform our prayers. A lot of the prayers we hear today in 2024 don't match these prayers because a lot of people are praying their will after their selfish desires and their lusts and not after the will of God. And no wonder we don't see God move as much anymore because most people are praying for trifling, trivial, superficial things and not things weighty like this. It says in verse 10, they are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. And that's what I want to cover there. Look at the providence of God here. Look at where Nehemiah is placed. It's so strategic. He's the cupbearer of the king. And if we haven't talked about this before, I think we talked about this during the time of Joseph. Remember, he interpreted the dreams of the chief baker and the cupbearer. One thing about the cupbearer is that's one of the closest opportunities you get to the king, and you gain the trust of the king because the purpose of a cupbearer is just not to bring a drink to a king. Kings often were assassinated, and there were plots placed on kings all the time. So the purpose of a cupbearer would be to taste test your drink and to drink your wine or your drink before the king drank it. And the king would look at his cupbearer, and if his cupbearer is feeling woozy, if he passes out, or if something is happening there, he knows that there's poison in that drink. And so the cupbearer really plays a strategic role in saving the king's life. And so a good king would always trust his cupbearer and gain a relationship with him because you have to realize he's the closest in proximity to him during times of eating and feasting. And so just by the nature of that, you would gain a relationship. And this is the case with Nehemiah. In fact, as we walk into chapter 2, now Artaxerxes is king. Now it says in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought to him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness in your heart. And so a lot of scholars say here that Nehemiah was taking a great risk because no king liked for anybody to be sad in his presence, because what it did was it showed the people that the king wasn't ruling well. And so even the persona of smiling and happiness was demanded by the king so that the subjects and all those who saw his rule and reign would perceive that he's a good king and that he's ruling well by the countenance of the people. And so this was a big risk, but it worked out because why? Nehemiah was a praying man and a man who prayed on the basis of the name of the Lord. It says here in verse 2, I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruin and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven and answered the king, if it pleases the king, if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so I can rebuild it. Then the king and the queen sitting beside him asked me, how long will your journey take? And when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters sent to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until my arrival in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. And not only did he grant his request, look at verse 9. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. And then in verse 10, it says, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. And so you see that opposition, which is similar to the same opposition that was experienced in Israel. In fact, these men were probably behind some of that opposition that we talked about in Israel, especially chapter 4. There's no way to know for sure, but it's not a wild assumption to make. So we already see the opposition brewing as we continue to walk through chapter 2. But I want you to notice something that Nehemiah does. First, he goes to inspect the walls. And so it says in verse 11 that I went out to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. So he examined the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down in its gates, and he moved toward the fountain gate, the king's pool, but there was not enough room. And he went up all through the night examining the walls. And there's something to learn here about the dreams and visions that the Lord gives you. Sometimes it's not wise to just go out and blurt them and share them with everybody, because everybody may not be ready to support you when the Lord gives you a vision, especially this type, for his name's sake. And so Nehemiah wisely prayed and walked with the Lord for 3 days before he started to bring it to the people. And then it says in verse 16, the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble that we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And look at their reply. They replied, let us start rebuilding. And so we began this good work. And there you have it. Good leadership. Ezra surveys the land. He examines his project. He takes notes. He's praying and walking with the Lord. And then he rolls out his plan to the people when he's ready. And then he even tells them that the hand of the Lord is on them. And we get excited when God's hand is on our life. What do? We want to run and tell everybody, let me show you what the Lord told me. You wouldn't believe. And people can immediately start shooting that down. How do you know it was the Lord? Did you read it in scripture? Prove to me that the Lord is working this out in your life. And a lot of times that 3 days is necessary for you to sit on things, meditate on them, make sure in your own heart that the Lord is moving you in this direction and you bathe it with prayer and it's spirit filled. Learn from me, learn from Nehemiah. This is called biblical decision making, not rushing, not jumping out there and telling man first, being saturated in the word with God, bathing it in prayer, allowing the decision to marinate, and then sharing with other people. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any close confidants that you shouldn't mull things over with and work through, but follow the wisdom of Nehemiah in your decision making, and you can be on safe ground. So he rolls it out to the people, and obviously Sanballat and Tobiah come to him and they ridicule and mock him. And they say, "Are you rebelling against the king?" And he answered and said, "The God of heaven will give us success. But as for you, you have no share in this or any claim or any historic right to it." And we see time and time again, as one is progressing for the Lord, even a vision that God gave, what comes? Enmity. Genesis 3:15, war. Satan is going to strike and bring opposition. And that's what happens. But we make a pit stop in chapter 3 and basically get a rundown on the building of the wall and who had certain assignments. And that's what you'll see in chapter 3. For instance, verse 1, the high priest and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place as far as the Tower of the 100. And so you'll see this over and over, the names of the families and the repairs that they actually made. Some made certain repairs, and you also see Nehemiah's leadership, because some of the people make repairs to sections of walls that are near their homes so they can walk there in close proximity and do the work well. And that speaks volumes to Nehemiah's leadership and his ability to strategically plan this out well so that everybody could play a part and this could be executed in a way that was efficient and in a way that was pleasing to God. And so a few takeaways that we can learn from Nehemiah in the first 3 chapters already. We can learn, 1, his heart for his people, his prayer, him risking it all before the king and bringing the entreaty of his heart before the king. And the reason that worked is because God's hand was on his life and he did it in the name of the Lord. 2, we see biblical decision-making, how he delays and prays and waits, even 3 days before he even reveals his vision to people. 3, we see good leadership, just how he structures and orders this out, gets the buy-in from the people when he's ready to move forward, allows people to work in proximity to their home so they're not burnt out. And also, we see opposition and how he stands up like a leader and handles opposition with strength and courage. Let's continue to learn well from Nehemiah as we look at the horizontal on top of the vertical we've already experienced from Ezra. Enjoying walking through this with you guys. Let's pick up on tomorrow. Take care.